Well, good morning. It's wonderful to see you this morning. I see a few new faces. I also see some faces of people who haven't been here for a while. I'm looking at you, Brady. Good to see you. Welcome back. Wonderful to have you all here. Everybody who's up high, too, welcome, welcome, and all of you at home, too. We're going to take a little bit of a break from the message on the Beatitudes. Let's just call it a commercial break. And today I'm going to speak to you on limits. And so what I'd like you to do, first of all, is to grab your Bible if you have it with you. If you don't, we have Bibles in the pews. It's actually on page 46 because we're going to Exodus 3. So find yourself Exodus 3. If you use the Bible app, that's also an easy fix. So Genesis, Exodus 3. And I'm going to read for you some excerpts from both Exodus 3 and 4. So let's read together. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I? And God said, I will be with you. Going to chapter 4. Moses answered, What if they do not believe me or listen to me? Then the Lord said to him, What is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Go, I will help you. And what about your brother Aaron? I know he can speak well. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. And take this staff in your hand so you can perform miraculous signs with it. So God is giving Moses an assignment here. And Moses is quick to point out, well, I have a speech impediment. I have a limit. And God basically says, don't you think I know how I created you, who I made you to be? Don't you think I know what somebody who is mute or deaf or blind is capable of? Don't you think, Moses, that I know what you are capable of? I am here to help. And guess what? Your brother excels in the areas that you might not. He speaks well. And also, you have been provided with a tool. You have your staff, and that is supplied there to help you too. Don't worry about your limits. Embrace them, love them. They are gifts from me. It might have been the very first time that Moses thought, my speech impediment is a gift? How's that again? Well, limits come in all shapes and sizes. So for Moses, it was a physical limitation. I have some physical limitations. I'm not all that tall. And sometimes that can be a benefit and sometimes it can be a limit. Whereas my husband's very tall, sometimes I'm sure that's a benefit, sometimes a limit. And I know that some people will have limits in their physical capacities where maybe there's a disability, a condition, an illness. Some people need an extraordinary amount of sleep so that they can just carry on and have a healthy life. Some people, well, are like me and they faint a lot. I am a fainter. You might not have known that about me. I fainted in grade 3 a couple of times. In grade 6, I fainted almost every single day. In junior high, we lived in the Mojave Desert in California, and I fainted every time it was hot, and it was hot a lot because it was the desert. By the time I was in high school, I kept fainting and fainting, and finally we're seeing specialists, but they couldn't figure anything out. Once I got married, the fainting kind of subsided a little bit, but I was still fainting, and I want to tell you about one time when I fainted, and I, as a youth pastor, was taking a group of teenagers to the West Edmonton Mall water park. Whole bunch of teens, me and one other youth leader. And I really like the slide that has the tubes. And so I went down the tube slide a couple of times, and then I thought, I'm just gonna take a break. Seems like everything's going well here. I'll relax in the hot tub. But after a little bit of time, one of the junior high students walked past, and I saw that she was by herself, and I thought, well, that won't do. So I went up to her and I said, hey, would you like to go on a slide together? And I suggested the corkscrew, because if you know the water park, the corkscrew are these twin slides. And so you could race each other. And she thought, oh, that sounds really exciting and fun. So we went on up, and all of a sudden, I had that all too familiar sensation that I was so used to. And generally speaking, when I feel that sensation, I instantly just kind of lay on the ground. But for some reason, that wasn't my first instinct. Instead, I decided I was going to hold on to the rail. And I don't know why, because next thing you know it, I woke up and I could hear the slide attendant frantically making a call down on the emergency helpline, medical attention necessary. And I'm really kind of out of it, and I notice that the junior high student that I'm with is peering over me, and she's making some notes. Your knee's bleeding, your foot's bleeding. And then a couple of kids that I don't know come running up as 3 EMTs are surrounding me. And the children say, is this for real, or are you just practicing on her? And then there's this gentleman, if you want to call him that, and he kind of saunters up to me, looks at me and says, if I was to give you a kiss, would that make you feel better? I'm laying there as weak as I am. I hold up my hand and I kind of wave my wedding ring in his face. Oh, okay. He leaves. And then the EMTs start pelting me with all sorts of questions. They're asking me things like, do you have diabetes? When's the last time you ate? How many times have you ate today? What did you eat? What's your blood pressure like? Who are you here with besides that little girl? The junior high student did not like being referred to as a little girl, I'll just tell you that. But I said, oh, I'm here with a whole group of people. And for the first time, the EMTs look relieved. And they said, who's in charge of your group? I said, well, I am. They didn't look relieved anymore. They weren't too excited about that. But what happened next was they gave me some orange juice. And I remember thinking, oh, my husband would be so proud. My husband loves free food and free drinks, and here they're giving me free orange juice. Like, that's kind of where my mixed up mind was. But then things are starting to come together, and I'm starting to think like myself again, and now it's getting time for the water park to close. And the EMTs have to figure out, how do we get her from up here to down there? And so they decided in their wisdom that they were going to strap me to the spinal board and they were going to shoot me down the slide. Thankfully, my mind had kind of come to a bit, and I stand up for myself. I said, if you don't mind, I could possibly give a suggestion, an alternate strategy. How about if I try to walk down the stairs? I mean, there's 3 of you, so you could have one person on either side of me, you could have one person in front, and we'll just walk down the stairs together. Okay, yeah, I guess we can try that. Oh, phew, okay, thank you. So the junior high student whipped down the slide herself. She went to tell everybody what was going on. I walk very slowly down the stairs. I get to the bottom. My chariot awaits. Well, actually, it was a wheelchair. They had me sit in the wheelchair and they pushed me along to the infirmary. But they had to go from this point to this point, which passed the whole kind of shoreline of the wave pool, where every single one of my youth were standing, and some of them were kind of waving like this. And they looked concerned. A few even had tears in their eyes. I was pale. I had an oxygen mask on my face. I'm in a wheelchair with 3 EMTs. They're probably thinking this doesn't look good. I realized at that time, I don't know why I hadn't figured it out before, but I have physical limitations and I have to be aware of that. And my limits, maybe I need to embrace them because I can't do it all on my own. Moses had his speech difficulty. I had my fainting spells. Finally, they let me go from the infirmary. And I had always promised that the evening would consist of water park and then pizza. And so I thought, I better be true to my word, and I'm kind of hungry anyway. So we went to Pizza Hut, and I've got this whole group of teenagers, and the server was just floored. She was like, I have never served teenagers like this. These guys are like angels. Are you from some sort of church group or something? Like I have not seen this before. What makes these guys different than any of the others that I have served before? And I thought in my head, well, maybe because they think I'm about to die. They want to send me away in a gentle way. Or maybe they think that I don't really have the strength to put up with their regular behavior shenanigans. Or maybe, and this is what I shared with her, the gospel truth of how Jesus does make us different, loving and living for him, just like these teenagers were doing. And had it not been for my fainting spell, I might not have had that divine appointment, that opportunity to share that message with that server that night. So besides physical limitations, what else might limit us? There's relational status. Did you know that in 1 Corinthians, Paul discusses marriage? And if you're married, that's a limit. For some of us, we can be limited by our family obligations. How many kids you have, what age your kids are. Is there somebody in your family who's special needs? Maybe an aging parent. Our family obligations, our family of origin, well, that will limit us in how and what and where we can serve God. Our intellectual capacity, that also limits us. So there's a lot of confessions of Pastor Thina this morning, but I am a little directionally challenged. And if I don't have my Google Maps, that can be very limiting for me. Our talents and our gifts, or lack thereof, that impose limits on us. I lack artistic ability. And when I draw a person, it's usually stick form, and my stick person looks like a stick bicycle, which looks like a stick boat and a stick dog, and that's about as well as my artistic ability, talent, or gift. I'm limited. Our material wealth, do you know that whether you are highly wealthy or not at all, you're impoverished, wherever you land, that produces a limit. And our personality limits us. We've got some extroverts in this building. We've got some introverts. And for some of us, we need a whole lot more time to recharge after we've been with people. If you consider and you understand and you're aware of your personality, it's unique, and it will also give you a window into discerning what your limitations might be. Our time is a limit. We have one life to live, and we can't do it all in that lifetime. Our time is running out. Our limits can also be work, relationship realities, life situations. If you were born and raised in Edmonton, it's a little different than if you were born and raised in the Bahamas. Our season of life is a God-given limit. So if you're young, you don't have a lot of life experience, sometimes you might find a whole lot of doors are closed to you. Ecclesiastes teaches us that there is a time or a season for everything under heaven. And there are seasons of prosperity, there are seasons of struggle, of grieving loss, of waiting. And did you know it's very important that we're not out there judging other people just because of the season that they happen to be in? What is important is that we accept our limits. And that's tough. And it's not just accepting our limits, it's embracing our limits. It's appreciating our limits. Contrary to popular belief, we cannot be anything and everything that we think we can be, or everything and anything that we want. It's a myth to say that anything we desire, we can do. Our culture, though, will tell us differently. Our culture will resist the idea of limits. You know, we're urged to keep all the balls up in the air. And if we can't do that, we start grieving. And you know, we also resent our limits, and we resent the limits that we see in other people. We expect so much more from ourselves than we were ever designed to do, and we expect that of other people as well. No, what I want us to do instead, I want us not to resent, but to embrace, to love those limits, to not see our limits as enemies, but to see them as friends. Because limits are gifts. They actually are gifts that we receive from God. They are not obstacles to overcome. And I can think of 4 ways that God blesses us when he gifts us with limits. First of all, limits will allow you to be faithful and will allow you to be true to yourself. So God created each of us not only in his image, but he also stamped on us a distinct person, sacredness and preciousness and value in the exact way that he designed you to be. Each life is a miracle from God, and he has created all of us to be these uniquely amazing individuals. He wants us to be faithful to our true self. And a next way that limits are a gift would be that they keep us grounded and humble. Our limits will drive us to humility before God like nothing else. And when we experience hardships, when we experience difficulties, we're actually easier to relate to. We actually understand other people. We accept imperfections. We accept flaws. We're less likely to be the type of person that people are like, I don't know, don't really much like that guy. He's so hard to relate to. Like he's got it all together. My father-in-law had a surgery, and after his surgery, all of his serotonin levels actually got really out of whack. And for the first time, he was experiencing some extreme depression. He had never felt like that before. And prior to his surgery, I mean, as loving and wonderful as he was, he just had a hard time relating to somebody who maybe had a mental health condition. And a lot of times he'd find himself saying, why can't they just suck it up? But then he experiences it himself. And all of a sudden, he is so much more humble. He is so much more relatable, and he sympathizes and he empathizes with anybody who's battling a particular mental health condition. A third gift that we get from our limits is that our limits encourage good behavior. Limits can often produce pain in our life. It can be painful to not be good at something or to be less than you think you should be, less than perfect, less than ideal. And you know what? God will use pain, though, to change our behavior. And so we'll change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes worse than the pain of changing. And God showed me one of my limits in that area. I like popcorn. I had popped myself a big bowl of popcorn. And popcorn's, meh, okay, but popcorn with butter, ooh, so good. I have my bowl full of popcorn, lots of butter. I eat it, and not too long after, I started feeling some pain. And the pain was just overtaking me from my chest to the bottom of my stomach. And the pain became so overwhelming, I couldn't even handle it anymore, to the point, I gotta go to the hospital. I went to the hospital. They gave me morphine. No amount of morphine could touch the pain. They recognized that I had a very sick gallbladder. They intubated me, and all sorts of things happened from that point on. But one thing that I learned was it's not a good idea to have a cup full of butter in your gut. And therefore, as a result, I started really changing my eating habits. So that limit of don't have so much butter in your system encouraged good behavior. So that was a gift. And finally, another gift that limits produce for us is that they help us do God's will for our lives. When we have limits, we're kept from going beyond what God is asking of us in our lives. You know, our limits, they kind of serve as like this fenced-in area for young children to protect them. That's kind of what they are like. And when you know your emotional and your physical and your intellectual capacities, it can be so freeing because it gives you the ability to say, actually, I can't, because you can't. You're not really designed to go beyond the walls that God has built for you. When we're true to ourselves, it's a good thing. When we're not true to our limits, we can actually start hurting ourselves. We can start hurting others. We can even hurt God's work. And God has placed enormous limits around even the most gifted person that you can think of. And those limits are meant to be blessings for each and every one of us. A part of being an emotionally healthy person is joyfully receiving the gifts and the talents that God distributes so graciously to us. And it's not about being frenzied. It's not about coveting what other people have. It's about having contentment. It's about having joy in who God has created you to be. It's about being at home with the person that you are. There's a lot of consequences when you go beyond your limits. You will find that you have too little time with too much to do. You're going to feel this constant feeling of pressure or maybe restlessness. You feel like you're trapped in your own schedule. You feel like you're endlessly rushing from this deadline to this deadline. And you start breaking promises of quality time with your loved ones. You feel like your work is never finished. You feel like there's needs upon needs upon needs, and you're not accomplishing anything. And negative emotions start rising to the surface. And you're stressed. So when you're stressed, you're blaming people and you're blaming things, and it's not their fault and it's not its fault. And in its most destructive form, going beyond your limits actually can lead to all sorts of abuse. So when you don't respect God's limits in your life, you're going to find yourself overextended, you're going to find yourself exhausted and stressed, and you experience burnout, and that's not good. So think about those consequences. Are any of these true in your life? Are you trying to live beyond the person that God has created and designed you to be? How is your inner joy impacted as a result? How are your close relationships impacted as a result? How is your service for Christ impacted? So speaking of service, it's really difficult sometimes for some of us to say no despite our limits. And I had to think, why is that? Why could that possibly be? And I thought of 4 reasons. One is sometimes we just have this inflated ego, and it's almost as though we think that we're God. We feel like we're invincible. Well, of course I can do that, and 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 I can do that. I'm invincible. Are you, though? Sometimes it's that we have a larger fantasy, a larger wish for ourselves than is the way that God had intended for us. And it's bigger than what our real life can support. And so we burn out because we just think we can do more. We can't. Sometimes we think if I stop, the world stops. Such a lie of the devil. Instead, we need to trust that God meets needs. Sometimes it's a mixed up theology. We hear Pastor Mark talking about the "what would Jesus do" bracelet sometimes that I don't think a whole lot of people are wearing anymore, but we all know what he's talking about. And so sometimes that's mixed up theology where we think, yeah, Jesus would have done that, right? But it takes great courage, it takes great strength for those of us who feel guilty when there's an unmet need to recognize I'm actually not the person who's been called to this, because I cannot keep up the pace of yesing everything. Jesus did actually model a life lived within limits. He fully accepted life, his humanity. He graciously received the limits. He, in fact, disappointed crowds because they had an expectation of him, and he didn't always do what was expected of him. But he did live a life where he was true and faithful to the call that he was given. He was able to say to his Father, I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work that you gave me to do. And that's God's call for each of you. Let's turn to Mark. We're going to go to the New Testament now, and this time Mark chapter 1. And we'll read from 32 to 39, 1 verse 32 to 39. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That's why I have come." So the next morning, needy people, they're already looking for Jesus. And what do you think the disciples thought when Jesus is like, "Okay, guys, peace out. We're going to the next village"? I mean, they were in the middle of a revival there. Stuff was happening. We can feel so un-Christ-like when we turn away hurting people. But, I mean, in a sense, Jesus kind of did that right there. I don't know. He didn't heal every single sick and demon-possessed person of the time. And he didn't stick around to build this great church in Capernaum, even though all the people were begging him to stay. And he didn't go in person to meet the needs of every person in Asia and Europe and Africa and the Americas. But he still could pray confidently at the end of his life, "I have completed the work you gave to do." So Jesus did embrace human limits. Do you think about the time when for 40 days he was tested? And what was Satan tempting him to do? He was always tempting him to cross over his limits. Many of us who are actively seeking to do God's work with our lives are also tempted to cross over, to go beyond what God has intended for us to do. And Jesus, he maintained a clear sense of God's plan for his life. Avoiding conflict, that wasn't his highest priority. No, it was doing God's will. He was able to separate himself from the expectations of the crowds, from the expectations of his family, and his disciples. He wasn't afraid to live out his own unique life, his own mission that he was given to accomplish, regardless of anybody else's agenda for his life. Sometimes I think about that. Am I living my agenda or someone else's agenda or God's agenda for my life? So it wasn't just Jesus that did this. John the Baptist did it as well. He embraced limits. Crowds were following him, and then they weren't following him. And some of John's followers were saying, well, hey, they're all going after him now. And John replied, well, God in heaven appoints each person's work. He must become greater, I must become less. He knew what his work was, and that was to prepare the way for Jesus. King David, I like to think about him and how he had this great thing going on. Life was going exceptionally well for him. Jerusalem was the capital. Right in the center was the ark of God's presence. David was riding this wave of popularity. He was publishing, songs of hymn and praise to worship God. And he desperately wanted to go the next step. He desperately wanted to build a temple. But God said no. God gave him a clear limit. And maybe David was embarrassed about this. Maybe David was disappointed. Maybe David was thinking, all the other, leaders, the pagan kings around, they have their great buildings where they're worshiping their little g gods. And maybe he thought, they're going to think I'm weak. Maybe he thought, they're going to think I'm foolish. So what did he do? He sat down and he prayed about it. He submitted then to God's limit. He trusted God's plan. And he couldn't see the future or know what would happen, but he realized God's God, I'm not. One of our biggest struggles when it comes to limits is sometimes those God-given boundaries. We have to think, is God good? Is he really sovereign? Can I trust him to stay within my fence? David had to accept that the knowledge that he had was too narrow to perceive God's plan. And only in time, or maybe not until eternity, would David know why he wasn't the one to build the temple. But he was faithful to his God-given limits, and he chose to prepare the materials so that then Solomon, his son, and the next generation could do that instead. So, if you know the story of David, you know he didn't always submit to his limits, and the times when he didn't submit to his limits, he was in trouble. There were problems, but in this particular case, David got it right. So we ask ourselves now, are you saying that we never, ever, ever go beyond our limit, that we just stay in that fence all the time? That's what I'm hearing. We love that fence, we love our limits, we stay there. Well, at times, God will take us outside of the fence. And when God takes us outside of the fence, that's a whole different picture. There's some examples of that. I think of Sarah. She's 90 years old, and in Romans it tells us that Abraham was as good as dead. Not a way that you want to be described as, right? Like, Abraham down the street, the one who's as good as dead. But this is how he's described in the Bible, and yet mother and father to so many nations. There's Elijah and Jeremiah. We read in God's word that they both were susceptible to bouts of depression, but they were used so mightily by God. And then there's Timothy. Did you know that he was really shy? He was timid, he was fearful, but God asked him and equipped him to lead a large and difficult church in Ephesus. This church was riddled with problems and divisions and difficulties, but God was at the helm in that situation, and he enabled Timothy to be able to do that. So in our weakness, he is strong. And God loves to use us in our weakness because that shows his strength even more. So there's certainly times that God allows us to go beyond our natural limits because he's got something supernatural planned for us. And like I said, in those times, he's always at the helm. So although we have weakness, he does not. And if it's his choice to use us in a supernatural way, then we are supposed to say, use me, O Lord. So my last point to make about limits is that we do need to remember that sometimes some of our limits are not God imposed, but sometimes some of our limits result because we have not done things God's way, because we have not taken care of ourselves the way that God's asked us to. So it's wrong to say, well, I'm just not really that way. That's not the way I am. I shouldn't do that. When we have abused the person that God's asked us to be. So let me give you an example. If you're going on a long flight and you say, well, I have a limit. I can only go on like a 4-hour or shorter flight because I need a smoke break. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. You know that God intends for you to be healthy. You know that he wants you to work on this nicotine addiction. You know that he wants you to not be controlled by it. And so you need to be true to the person that God's intended you to be. It might require a bit of, going above and beyond. Maybe you're pushing yourself, so you're running a little faster or walking a little farther, because God probably hasn't called you to be the couch potato that you've grown accustomed to being, right? So you have to think that part through. But as you this morning consider your list of limits, I want you to pray a prayer. I want you to identify those limits and ask God about them. Say, thank you, God, for them. Ask God to show you how to receive those limits so that they are a gift, because you might have been thinking of them as a curse or a hindrance. No, they are a gift from God. So this morning, we have emulated the practices of the early church. If we read in Acts 2:42, it says that the community of believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. So I want to thank you for taking the time to devote yourself to God's word as you listen to this message based on Scripture. We have been participating each week in worship, and we are devoted in fellowship as a united community together in Christ. And we're also called to be devoted to the Lord's Supper, where we examine our hearts and our lives and where we celebrate the sacrifice of Christ that covers all believers. So in a moment, we are going to partake in communion, but first, let's devote ourselves to prayer once again. Let's pray. God, help us to devote ourselves to your word. God, may we devote ourselves to community with one another. Lord, it is our goal to remember your promises and to pray. God, may our prayers not be supplemental in our lives or in our church, but may they be fundamental in everything that we do. Lord, we embrace the limits that you have gifted us with. And Father, we thank you for igniting within us a passion to love the way that you have designed us to be. God, through the finished work of Jesus Christ, through the activity of the Holy Spirit, we choose to activate our faith. We choose to experience new life in you as we respond to your command today. Amen.